Hey, I'm Justin. In this video, we're going over tracking. So tracking is the art of understanding ourselves through understanding our relationships with other people. And the other way I talk about this is understanding the cords that connect us. So we have cords that connect us to everybody and everything. And the cords that are the most active, or the most potent for this work are the ones that we can examine in the people that are closest to us, our closest relationships. So in these cords, there's actually three parts to these cords with other people. At the very deepest level is the cord of what I call, that's called the spirit level or the divine level. This is the level at which the people in our life we love, we have a deep companionship, deep connection or compassion, brotherhood, sisterhood, a deep love and respect for people. That's at the very, very, very central level. That's what the relationship is. Outside of that is where a lot of people get stuck. Outside of the level of spirit is the wound. And this is the structure of the cord. The wound is all the resentment and the hurt and the painful feelings that we have about somebody else. And what happens is when those don't get processed with the person, we end up building a third structure around that, which I call the wall. The wall is a structure we build to actually hide or to separate or to push away those uncomfortable feelings. But the thing is, the wall doesn't work long term. It can work short term and we can kind of forget about that stuff. But what happens is with these cords, these little hurt feelings are gonna pop out through the cord. And whoever we're in relationship with, they're gonna trigger those feelings inside of us. It's going to happen. And then what we do is we usually wrap those feelings up with a whole nother wall. We make it, we write a story, we tell ourselves, oh, that person is the problem, anything but to prevent me from going deeper in. What happens is the very top level of those wounds usually gets triggered. And that very top level is usually like anger. Oh, forget that person is whatever. And then we wall it off, we shut them down, we cut the cord with them, and then we move on. And then the next person pushes on that same thing. And usually as long as that wound is unhealed, we end up repeating that same pattern over and over again. Because at its core, the wound is this part of us that's seeking to be revealed through these relationships. As long as we keep walling it off, it's just gonna keep happening. And then we're gonna end up with a really antagonistic relationship with the world. So with tracking, what we do is we go in. So what I encourage people to do is to get triggered and explore that trigger. Oh, okay, this person makes you angry. Great. What's under the anger is usually hurt, shame, resentment, loneliness, or who knows what is underneath all of that stuff, all these unpleasant emotions. And then if we can work through that, underneath that is actually a love and compassion connection with that person. But as long as all those unhealed wounds are there, as long as they're walled off, we'll never get to that level. This stuff is tricky because when we start talking about it, what usually happens, people are like, oh yeah. And then, so actually we'll talk about this in terms of the contracts or in terms of a part of what the wall does is it makes us feel safe. It makes us feel safe and also powerless at the same time. It's actually a disempowered safety, which is a part of the contract with the wall is, let's say we're upset at somebody and then we tell ourselves, I don't need to bring that up. Because to bring that up means potentially risking a relationship, or it means maybe the person will get mad at me. So we have all sorts of reasons why we may not want to bring up with the people that are close to us, why we may not want to bring things up to them. And then we justify it with, well, I'm doing it for them. And what the wall does is it's all about externalities and generalities. So the external, what you people usually say when they're talking from the wall is, I can't bring something up to this other person because they'll get mad. And that's a wall statement. So what I try to do is at least say, well then if they get mad, how would you feel? And then they start to rethink it and reframe some of these contracts. And then people usually start to understand, oh, well, if they get mad at me, what if they bring stuff up to me? And now I have to listen to them. And now actually when we really start to go in, we start to realize that whether we say or don't say something, especially somebody close to us, it's all because we don't want to feel what's happening inside. At the real core is whether we decide to have what I call these uncomfortable conversations or not, it's only because of us and us not wanting to feel something. In general, there's a lot of other kind of caveats here. In general, what happens is our cord attaches onto somebody else's cord. And our contracts, especially the wall contracts, attach onto their wall contracts. And then if we start to say, hey, I got this problem, then their wall is going to say, oh, you know what? I got this problem. And then now what they usually are telling us is, if you bring this up to me, I'm going to bring this up to you. And if we're not really prepared to hear or to listen, then what we'll do is we'll kind of separate and back off. So what happens is our walls usually hook into each other in this really uncomfortable way. And then underneath, our wounds are constantly triggering each other, and we're constantly trying to use our walls to shift and get away. So with this work, the first step before I used to tell people, go have the uncomfortable conversation. Now what I start to do is we're gonna go slower and we're gonna say, what would it feel like to start having this uncomfortable conversation? And then once you start to imagine what it would feel like to have, let's say, these uncomfortable conversations, you can start to see how you've constructed this wall around the wound that's underneath. Most people's relationships, the wall is like a master. If we can think of the wall itself as an embodied energy or a spirit, it's the master of games. And what it does is it's like a manipulative game player. And ultimately, all we're doing is we're playing games with ourselves. We think we're playing with other people, and in a certain sense we are. But as long as we are using that wall to disconnect from ourselves, we're just playing games with ourselves. We're actually tricking and deceiving ourselves. And so this work is about getting triggered and exploring how we get triggered, and also the nature and the construct of the wall that we've created to play games with ourselves. And this is the part where people have to at least have a little bit of trust. What this work, this tracking work does for most people, it goes against the entire construct for how they've gone through life up to this point. And when we start talking about this stuff, it feels very threatening to actually some very basic survival mechanisms. A lot of the wall is based on what feels like survival. And it's going to do whatever it can to survive, actually. This wall is like a ego construct, and it doesn't want to die. So usually when I start talking about this stuff, and usually have people start imagining these conversations, it does feel like a little death. And in the shamanic world, that's actually very, very, very important to be able to actually go through death and then have a rebirth too. So this is a tricky thing in that a part of ourselves, when we do this stuff, actually is dying. And what I ask people is just for a little bit of trust that this process, it's not a physical death, but to go through a death and a rebirth, to just trust that there is something, and what I call that compassion at the end. I can't tell you how many times in my own life and in people I've worked with, when they've had these uncomfortable conversations with people, especially people that they're really close to, parents, children, all of that, when they actually have these uncomfortable conversations, they actually get into a place of deeper love and compassion with the people that they're close to. Happen over and over and over again. But it just feels very scary to do it. So for tracking, the key is when a situation or a person triggers you, which means triggers an emotion, is to recognize, is there a wall that pops up? Usually it's so quick, a wall that pops up, that either that gets defensive or lashes out or shuts down or disconnects. That's the wall. So when tracking, the first thing to recognize is when that happens, to be aware as possible of that process. The more aware we are for tracking, the better things will be. So awareness is just acknowledging to ourselves what is happening in the moment. So we get triggered. Do I shut down? Do I numb out? Do I check out? That's the wall. So being aware. And if you can, what we try to do at this stage, this first stage is, am I trying to dissociate or disconnect? And if so, just crack open a little bit into what's underneath that disconnect. What's underneath? What am I actually feeling? And then in that feeling is usually hurt or loss or pain of some kind. And if you can just even feel into that a little bit, that's the first stage of tracking.